Hello and welcome to video 4 lesson 2. We left off with talking about the pituitary gland, and I just wanted to kind of show you here. Remember that the pituitary gland is going to hang off this hypothalamus here in the brain. So hormones of the anterior pituitary gland are all going to be proteins, which mean they're going to be amino acid based. They all go through what's called the second messenger system. This means that once a hormone is released from the anterior pituitary gland, it's going to travel to its target organ and then bind to the outside of the cell, which then causes an internal change. Steroid proteins, which we get into later, actually go through what we call direct gene activation, where they enter into the cell and actually cause proteins to be made. So second messenger system, all this means is that these hormones we talk about are going to actually bind to the outside of the target cell and cause some sort of internal change. All are going to be regulated by hormonal stimuli and mostly negative feedback. Some of them are also going to be what we call tropic hormones. Tropic hormones mean that they are going to go to another organ and stimulate that organ to release another hormone. And these are all going to be really endocrine glands that they're going to target. For example, one is going to be the thyrotropic hormone, or the thyroid stimulating hormone, which travels to the thyroid. Adrenocorticotropic is going to stimulate your adrenal glands, and then you have two gonadotropic hormones that are going to stimulate either the ovaries or the testes. So first we'll talk about the growth hormone. So this is hormone number 1, growth hormone. This is your general metabolic hormone. It's not a tropic hormone because it's not going to another endocrine gland. It actually targets skeletal muscle and bone to grow. It's an anabolic hormone, which means it's actually building up cells and tissues. So that's why when you are young, you're secreting a lot of growth hormone because you're growing very, very fast. It also causes fat to be broken down and used for energy if glucose is sparse. So this is hormone number 1, the growth hormone, or GH. And GH gets secreted from the anterior pituitary, where it goes to bones and muscles and causes growth. Pituitary dwarfism is hyposecretion of the growth hormone, and this can actually cause a human to just be a maximum of 4 feet tall. Then you have gigantism. This is hypersecretion of the growth hormone during childhood. And we see a lot of these people, they grow very, very tall. They can even grow to 10 to 11 feet. The problem with gigantism is that even though their bones and muscles are growing and they're really tall, a lot of their organs stay the same size. So what we see is these people that are so incredibly tall because of this hypersecretion of the growth hormone, they're actually unable to supply their body with enough blood because their heart can only just pump so hard. They don't really tend to live past their 30s or 40s. All right, hormone number 2, prolactin. This is going to target the breast tissue in women. We actually don't know what it does in men at all. And prolactin is going to stimulate and maintain milk production after childbirth. So it's really important for after giving childbirth, this is what's going to help produce your milk. Then you have ACTH, or the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Try to say that one. I think it's hilarious trying to say that one because it's just a huge long work. But what it regulates, there's that word tropic, so we know it's going to target another endocrine organ. Adrenocortico. All this means is it's actually going to stimulate the adrenal cortex, so the outer portion of the adrenal glands. Then you have your thyrotropic, or thyroid stimulating hormone. This is going to go to the thyroid gland and influence the activity there. Okay, so here was hormone number 2, prolactin. It's going to travel to breast tissues, particularly the mammary glands, and produce milk after childbirth. We also talked about the thyroid stimulating hormone, or thyrotropic hormone. This is going to go to the thyroid and help with secreting of different thyroid hormones. Then ACTH, or the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is going to go to the adrenal cortex here, the outer portion of the adrenal glands. Remember, this sits on top of a kidney, and it's going to stimulate the release of different hormones from there. So now we have to talk about the gonadotropic hormones. There's that word tropic again. So we know it's going to go target another endocrine organ, and in particular the gonads, or sex organs. So depending on if you're male or female, these are going to have very different functions. First, follicle stimulating hormone. This is going to help stimulate follicle development in females. Follicles are the tissues that really surround the egg, and once that follicle is maturing around the egg actually can get ready for ovulation. When you go to the gynecologist, if you're trying to have a baby and they're talking about fertility, they often talk about how many mature follicles you have. And then in males, it helps with sperm development. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, is going to trigger ovulation from an egg, or of the egg from the ovary. And when we get into the reproductive system, we talk about estrogen, progesterone, and the luteinizing hormone a lot. And then in men, luteinizing hormone is going to help stimulate testosterone production, which is the major male sex hormone. All right, so here was our last two that we just talked about, the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Make sure you know the differences between men and women. It's very important to know that they obviously have very different functions based on what reproductive organ you have. So we need to talk about the pituitary-hypothalamus relationship. The hypothalamus is what the pituitary gland hangs off of, and really it's ultimately going to control those hormones being released from the pituitary. And really it has a lot to do with this posterior pituitary here. So the hypothalamus can release and inhibit its own hormones, which then travel to your anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus itself actually produces oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone that gets stored in the posterior pituitary here. So not only does the hypothalamus regulate all of those anterior pituitary hormones we talked about, but it makes two of its own hormones and stores them in that posterior pit. So our posterior pituitary lobe really isn't technically an endocrine gland. All it does is it stores and releases the hormones made by the hypothalamus. It doesn't actually make its own hormones. And the first hormone that it makes is something called oxytocin. This is what stimulates uterine contractions during labor. Very, very important. This is one of those positive feedback examples. Once the uterus starts to contract, that's a change, that's a stimulus. We actually keep increasing that because your contractions, girls that have had, or you guys that have had moms and dads or aunts and uncles that are going to have a baby, you know when they're in the hospital, their contractions start out short and not very strong, and then as birth gets closer and closer and closer, those contractions get longer and stronger. That's because they're releasing more and more oxytocin into the body. So the contractions are actually getting longer and stronger. And you actually can, one of the things you can do to induce labor is they can make oxytocin in a lab and actually start labor. All right, and then the other hormone of the hypothalamus is your antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. And this inhibits the production of urine. So this is when, if you start to become dehydrated, this hormone can actually cause the kidneys to reabsorb more water back into your bloodstream instead of forming urine. So if you've ever exercised like a lot, if you're like me, I was a soccer player in high school and we played soccer for a straight 90 minutes and I never had to go to the bathroom because you actually wanted to reabsorb more water because you were sweating so much. If you have very low blood pressure, the ADH hormone also causes water to be reabsorbed in the bloodstream because it can increase your blood pressure. And that's why when you go to the doctor sometimes, they will give you something called vasopressin, which increases blood pressure. This is basically ADH. And then your fun fact of the day, drinking alcohol inhibits ADH secretion. So people that are drinking often have to go to the bathroom a lot because they're just making more and more urine. And then I love this image down here. This is something called diabetes insipidus. Has nothing to do with diabetes mellitus, which is the diabetes you're more common with and know about. This is actually a different disorder. And what this is the pituitary gland doesn't produce enough ADH. So you're just making a lot more urine than you should. So you always kind of feel dehydrated and you're drinking a ton and a ton and a ton of water because you're not able to really regulate how much urine you're forming. All right, so that is it for video 2 and the pituitary gland. Your next lesson will focus on all of the other endocrine organs. So make sure you filled out your note guide, and thanks for watching.